there is a letter that never gets easier to write. The kind where you already know before you finished the first line that the person reading it might not want to hear what you're trying to say. And yet, you write it anyway. In the early 1970s, Bing Crosby was a man who had lived most of his life in public. His voice had filled living rooms across America for nearly 5 decades. His face had smiled down from movie screens in nearly 100 films. His Christmas records were as much a part of the season as snow and candlelight. He was, by any measure, one of the most beloved entertainers the world had ever known. But in those quieter years, the years after the applause had found its rhythm, after the records had all been made and the films had all been shot, he sat sometimes in a room that felt too still, and he thought about his sons. Bing Crosby's relationship with the 4 sons from his first marriage, Gary, Dennis, Philip, and Lindsay, was, by every honest account, a difficult one. He had been a man of his era, raised in a time when a father's love was measured more by provision than presence. He had worked, he had provided, he had made sure there was every comfort money could buy. But warmth, the quiet, unhurried kind, had not always come easily to him. Discipline had. Distance had. And in the years when his boys were young and still looking up at him, waiting to be seen, what they often found instead was a father who did not quite know how to lower himself to their level, or perhaps could not, or perhaps never learned how. By the time he understood what had been missing, his sons were grown men with their own lives and their own memories, memories that were not always kind. And Bing was left with something that no amount of success can ever fill in, the space where a different kind of presence should have been. He reached, in those final years. It was not always graceful. It was not always well received. Some of his sons would carry their complicated feelings about their father long into their own adult lives. Feelings that wouldn't fully find voice until years after Bing was gone. But he reached. There are accounts of letters, of phone calls, of quiet gestures that might have gone unnoticed if you weren't paying attention. A man trying, in the way that men of his generation tried, not with words that came easily, but with the effort behind the words. Not with the perfect apology, but with the imperfect attempt. His granddaughter later spoke of a gentler Bing in those years, a man who was learning, slowly, that it was not too late to be different, even if being different came awkwardly, even if the past could not be rewritten. He had mellowed, people said. He had softened in ways that perhaps the younger version of himself would not have allowed. But the distance between a man and his grown sons is not easily closed by softening. Some of his boys met him part way. Some could not. And Bing lived long enough to understand the difference between an attempt and a success, and long enough to make the attempt anyway. There is something deeply human about that. The reaching that knows it may not be met. The letter that knows it may not be answered. The phone call where you rehearse the words 3 times before dialing, and then say something completely different, something simpler, something that doesn't quite do justice to what you meant, but is at least honest. Bing Crosby died in October of 1977, on a golf course in Spain, not long after finishing a concert tour at the London Palladium. He had been, in those final performances, vibrant and seemingly content. His second wife, Catherine, and the 3 younger children from that marriage were with him in those later years. But his relationship with the 4 older sons, Gary, Dennis, Philip, Lindsay, remained a complicated thing right up to the end. Not fully repaired. Not fully closed, but not abandoned either. He had tried. Imperfectly, inconsistently, in the way that real people try. Not in the neat arc of a movie where the father makes his speech and the sons forgive and everyone walks out into the sunlight. In the real, halting, sometimes painful way. The way most of us try, when we try at all. Maybe you felt something like this. Not on a stage, not with a name the whole world knows, but in a relationship that has grown quiet over time. A child, a sibling, a friend, someone you once were close to and somehow, without quite deciding to, drifted from. Maybe there was a misunderstanding that was never resolved. Maybe there were years that passed without a real conversation, and now the silence has become so familiar that reaching through it feels almost impossible. Maybe you were the one who was hurt. Maybe you were the one who caused the hurt. Maybe it was both, the way it usually is. And maybe you have been telling yourself, quietly, in the back of your mind, that it is probably too late now, that too much time has passed, that the other person has moved on, or that they wouldn't want to hear from you, or that you wouldn't know what to say, or that saying something imperfectly is worse than saying nothing at all. Bing Crosby's story says otherwise. Not because his attempts were perfect. They were not. Not because they always worked. Some did not. But because the reaching itself, the decision to try, even knowing it might not go the way you hope, is not nothing. It is, in fact, everything. There is a kind of courage that no one talks about very much. It's not the courage of the battlefield or the big stage. It's the courage of picking up the phone when you're not sure you'll be welcomed. The courage of writing the first line of a letter you've been putting off for years. The courage of saying quietly, "I know things between us have been difficult. I know I wasn't always what you needed. But I'm here. And I wanted you to know that I still think of you." That kind of courage doesn't make headlines. But it changes things. Sometimes slowly, sometimes only a little. And sometimes, more than you could ever predict, it changes everything. Maybe the person on the other end has been waiting too. Waiting for someone to go first. Waiting for the silence to be broken by something other than more silence. You don't know until you try. And the only way to know is to try. If there is someone you've been meaning to reach, this might be the moment. Not tomorrow, not when you find the right words, because the right words may never fully arrive, and waiting for them is just another name for waiting. You don't need to fix everything. You don't need a speech. You don't need certainty about how it will be received. You just need to begin. A message, a letter, a phone call where you say the simple thing, "I've been thinking about you." I wanted to reach out. I'm glad you answered. Even if the reaching is imperfect, and it will be, because that's how reaching works, it is never wasted. Even if it isn't met the way you hoped, something has shifted. Something honest has been said. And the part of you that has been carrying the weight of that unspoken thing will feel just a little lighter. Bing Crosby did not get the full reconciliation he may have been hoping for with all of his sons. Some wounds had gone too deep, too early. Some distances had grown too wide. And yet, he reached. In his own imperfect way, with his own imperfect words, in the time that remained to him, he reached. That is not a failure. That is what trying looks like when it is real. And if you are watching this tonight, and there is someone in your life who needs to hear from you, or someone you've been hoping might reach out to you first, let me offer you this thought. You don't have to wait for perfect. You don't have to wait until you have figured out exactly what you want to say. You don't have to wait until the other person shows some sign that they would welcome it. You just have to decide that the relationship, whatever it once was, whatever it still could be, is worth one more attempt. One more honest, imperfect, human attempt. Because the truth is, time does not wait for readiness. It moves on its own schedule, quietly, while we are still deciding. And the moments when reaching is still possible, those moments are worth something. They are worth everything. Bing Crosby stood at a microphone for 50 years and gave the world his voice. But in those quiet final years, the most important thing he gave, or tried to give, was something simpler than any song. It was just a hand extended towards someone he loved, asking, "Is it too late for us?" Maybe you have that same question about someone in your life. Maybe they have that question about you. There is still time to find out. There is still time to try. Take a slow breath. Think of the person who comes to mind. And let yourself wonder, just for a moment, what would I say if I were brave enough to begin? That wondering, that quiet courage, is where every reconciliation starts. It started there for Bing. It can start there for you.